Mom, stop calling unless it's about the rent. Those were the last words I heard from my son before everything changed forever. The silence that followed felt like a coffin closing over my heart. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I'm sitting here in my small Brooklyn apartment, my fingers wrapped around a cold cup of coffee that's been forgotten for hours. The morning light filters through my kitchen window, casting shadows across the linoleum floor that's seen better days. I'm 73 years old, and I never imagined my life would feel this empty. My name is Eleanor, and I raised my children in this very apartment. These walls have absorbed decades of laughter, tears, arguments, and reconciliations. The refrigerator still hums the same tired tune it did when my kids were small, when they would run to me with scraped knees and broken hearts, when I was their whole world. Now that same refrigerator holds a single carton of milk, some wilted lettuce, and a loneliness so thick I could spread it on bread. The phone call from my son Michael came on a Tuesday morning. I had been watering the small pot of herbs on my windowsill, humming an old song my mother used to sing to me. The phone's sharp ring cut through my peaceful moment like a rusty knife. I picked up with my usual cheerful greeting. "Hello, sweetheart, how are you doing?" "Mom." His voice was flat, tired. "I need to talk to you about something." My heart fluttered with that familiar mix of hope and anxiety. Maybe he wanted to come for dinner. Maybe he missed our Sunday conversations. Maybe my grandson had said something sweet about Grandma. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" "Look, Mom, I'm going to be straight with you. You call too much. It's becoming a problem." The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white against the plastic. I just like to check on you, Michael. You're my son. I know, but we both think you're being too clingy. We have our own lives now, our own problems." Sarah, his wife of 6 years, the woman who smiled sweetly at family gatherings but whose eyes held a distance that made me feel like an intruder in my own son's life. "I understand you're busy," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I just worry about you." "Well, don't. We're fine. Look, unless it's about the rent money, maybe just give us some space." The rent money. Those 3 words echoed in my head like a death sentence. Was that all I was to him now? A monthly check that allowed him and Sarah to live in their nice apartment in Park Slope? "Michael, I have to go, Mom. We'll talk later." The line went dead, leaving me holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than concrete. I set it down with trembling hands and stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my old television. An elderly woman stared back at me, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun, her brown eyes filled with a pain so deep it seemed to have no bottom. That evening, I sat in my favorite armchair, the one my late husband Robert had bought me for my 50th birthday. The fabric was worn thin now, but it still held his memory in its threads. I picked up the small photo album I kept on the side table, the one filled with pictures of Michael and his sister Rebecca from childhood through their college graduations. Here was Michael at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning, his arms wrapped around my neck in a fierce hug. Here he was at 10, proudly showing off the science fair trophy we'd worked on together for weeks. At 18, handsome in his graduation cap and gown, his arm around my shoulders as we posed for what felt like hundreds of pictures that day. When had I become the enemy in his story? I closed the album and walked to the window, looking out at the familiar streets of Williamsburg. The neighborhood had changed so much over the decades. The old Italian bakery where I used to buy fresh bread was now a yoga studio. The corner market where Mr. Peterson knew everyone's name was replaced by a trendy coffee shop that charged more for 1 cup than I used to spend on groceries for a week. But change, I had learned, wasn't always progress. I pulled my worn wool cardigan tighter around my shoulders and made myself a simple dinner of soup and crackers. As I ate alone at my small kitchen table, I couldn't stop thinking about Michael's words. Unless it's about the rent. The rent. Let me tell you about that rent. 3 years ago, when Michael and Sarah were struggling to find an affordable place in Brooklyn, I offered to help. Not just with the security deposit, though I paid that too. I offered to cover their monthly rent until they could get on their feet financially. What mother wouldn't want to help her child? "Just temporarily, Mom," Michael had promised, his eyes bright with gratitude. "Maybe 6 months, tops." Sarah's job is picking up, and I'm looking at some opportunities that could really pan out. 6 months turned into a year turned into 2, 2 years turned into 3, and here we were, with me sending $1,500 every month to my son while living on Social Security and the small pension from my 40 years as a secretary at the Brooklyn Public Library. I never complained, not once. I cut back on my grocery budget, wore my old clothes until they were practically rags, and turned down the heat in winter to save money. When my doctor recommended physical therapy for my arthritis, I smiled and said I was feeling much better. Thank you, knowing I couldn't afford the copays. But I never missed a rent payment for Michael. Not even when I had to choose between my heart medication and groceries that month. I just made the choice and sent the check. And now, apparently, that monthly transaction was the only reason my son wanted to hear from me. I finished my soup and washed the single bowl in my small sink. The kitchen felt enormous around me, filled with the ghosts of family dinners and birthday celebrations. I used to cook elaborate Sunday meals, inviting Michael and Rebecca over with their families. The apartment would fill with the sounds of conversation, laughter, and the blessed chaos of my grandchildren. Now those Sunday dinners were a memory. Michael was always too busy, too tired, too something. Rebecca lived in Seattle with her family, and while she called more often than her brother, the distance made visits rare and brief. I dried the bowl and put it away, then stood in my kitchen wondering how the rest of my evening would pass. Television held no appeal. Reading hurt my eyes after dark. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, heavy with silence and regret. That's when I noticed the stack of mail on my counter, the bills I'd been putting off opening because I was afraid of what they might contain. The electricity bill had gone up again. The phone bill included charges I didn't understand. And there, at the bottom of the pile, was the receipt from my latest money transfer to Michael's landlord. $1,500. $1,500 that could have paid for new glasses, better food, maybe even a small vacation to visit my sister in Florida. Instead, it went to support a son who couldn't be bothered to return my phone calls. I picked up the receipt and stared at it until the numbers blurred together. When had love become a financial transaction? When had being a mother transformed me into nothing more than an automatic payment system? The questions haunted me as I prepared for bed, changing into the same flannel nightgown I'd worn for years because buying new clothes seemed frivolous when my son needed rent money. I brushed my teeth with a toothbrush I should have replaced months ago and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired, older than her 73 years, worn down by decades of giving and giving and giving until there was nothing left but an empty bank account and a telephone that rarely rang. I climbed into bed and tried to sleep, but Michael's words kept echoing in my mind, unless it's about the rent, as if that was all I was worth, as if 25 hours of labor bringing him into this world, countless sleepless nights when he was sick, years of scraped knees and homework help and proud moments at school plays meant nothing compared to $1,500 a month. The next morning, I decided to call Rebecca. Maybe talking to my daughter would help me make sense of what had happened with Michael. Rebecca had always been the more sensitive of my two children, more willing to listen, more patient with her old mother's worries. She answered on the third ring, and I could hear the familiar sounds of her household in the background. My grandson practicing piano, my granddaughter arguing about breakfast, the cheerful chaos of a family starting their day. Hi, Mom. How are you doing? I'm fine, sweetheart. How are the kids? We spent a few minutes catching up on school activities and weekend plans before I gathered the courage to tell her about my conversation with Michael. Rebecca, I need to ask you something. Do you think I call too much? There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough for my stomach to tighten with dread. Mom, you do call quite a bit. I mean, I don't mind, but Michael mentioned that you've been, well, that you seem lonely. Lonely. The word hit me like a physical blow. Of course I was lonely. I was a 73-year-old widow whose children lived their own lives while I sent rent checks and waited for phone calls that came less and less frequently. I'd just like to know how you're both doing, I said quietly. I know, Mom. But maybe you could find some other activities? Some friends your own age? There are senior centers in Brooklyn, aren't there? Senior centers. Like I was ready to be put out to pasture with other discarded mothers who had outlived their usefulness to their children. Maybe, I whispered, knowing I would never set foot in one of those places. The last thing I wanted was to be surrounded by other lonely old women comparing stories of neglect and abandonment. After I hung up with Rebecca, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the phone and wondering when I had become such a burden to the people I loved most in the world. The morning stretched ahead of me, empty and endless, filled with nothing but my own thoughts and regrets. I had worked for 40 years, raising 2 children mostly on my own after Robert died when they were teenagers. I had sacrificed my dreams, my social life, my own needs to make sure they had everything they needed to succeed in life. I had been proud of the adults they became, Michael with his marketing job, Rebecca with her teaching career and beautiful family. But somewhere along the way, I had become invisible to them, a monthly obligation instead of a cherished mother, a voice on the phone they tolerated rather than welcomed. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. Maybe fresh air would clear my head and help me figure out how to navigate this new reality where my love was unwanted and my presence was a burden. I walked slowly down Graham Avenue, past the new boutiques and artisanal cheese shops that had replaced the hardware store and barbershop I remembered from decades past. The neighborhood was full of young families now, hipsters with expensive strollers and designer coffee cups, people who looked right through me as if I were part of the scenery. I paused outside the coffee shop that used to be Peterson's Market and remembered buying penny candy for Michael and Rebecca when they were small. They would press their faces against the glass case, debating between Swedish fish and chocolate kisses, while Mr. Peterson waited patiently with a smile. "Take your time," he would say. "This is an important decision." Now the same space sold $15 coffee drinks to people who seemed to have more money than they knew what to do with, while I counted quarters to make sure I had enough for a bus ride. I continued walking until I reached McGulrick Park, where I used to bring the children to play when they were young. The playground equipment was different now, modern and colorful, but I could still see Michael and Rebecca in my mind, racing toward the swings while I followed behind with snacks and Band-Aids, and all the supplies a mother carries. I sat on a bench and watched a young mother pushing her toddler on a swing, the little boy shrieking with delight as he sailed back and forth. The woman looked tired but happy, completely focused on her child's joy. I remembered being that mother, remembered when my children's happiness was my primary concern, and their laughter was the most beautiful sound in the world. What had happened to those days? When had I stopped being essential to their lives and started being a nuisance? An older man sat down on the other end of my bench, and we nodded politely to each other. He was feeding pigeons from a small bag of breadcrumbs, talking softly to the birds as they gathered at his feet. "Nice day," he said, glancing over at me. "Yes," I agreed, though the day felt anything but nice from where I was sitting. "Do you have grandchildren?" he asked, nodding toward the playground. "Two," I said, "but they live in Seattle." "Ah, mine are in California. I see them maybe once a year, if I'm lucky." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two elderly people sharing a bench and the weight of our separate loneliness. I wondered if he also sent money to children who preferred his absence to his presence, if he also lay awake at night wondering where he had gone wrong as a parent. When I finally walked home, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the sidewalk. My apartment felt even smaller and quieter than usual, filled with the echo of Michael's words and the growing realization that my life had become something I barely recognized. That evening, I sat down with my checkbook and calculated exactly how much money I had been sending to Michael over the past 3 years. The number shocked me. Nearly $60,000. $60,000 that had come from my small savings, my Social Security, and the gradual liquidation of the modest investment account Robert had left me. $60,000, and for what? So my son could treat me like an unwelcome stranger? So he could tell me not to call unless it was about rent money? I closed the checkbook and walked to my bedroom where I kept a small jewelry box on my dresser. Inside was a pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary, along with my wedding ring and a few other pieces I had treasured over the years. I had been considering selling the pearls to help cover next month's expenses, since the money I sent to Michael left my own budget stretched thin. But as I held the necklace up to the light, examining the lustrous beads that had once made me feel so beautiful and loved, I found myself wondering why I should sell my memories to subsidize my son's rejection. The next few days passed in a blur of routine activities and growing resentment. I went to the grocery store and carefully compared prices, putting back items I wanted because I couldn't afford them after paying Michael's rent. I turned down an invitation from my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, to see a movie because even a matinee ticket felt like too much of an extravagance. Meanwhile, I found myself scrolling through Michael's social media posts, studying pictures of him and Sarah at expensive restaurants and weekend getaways. In one photo, Sarah was wearing a designer handbag that cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. In another, they were posing with cocktails at some trendy rooftop bar, both of them smiling broadly at the camera. This was the couple I was supporting with my Social Security checks. These were the people who found my phone calls burdensome. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after Michael's crushing phone call, I was sitting in my kitchen eating a simple dinner of pasta and butter when my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my heart skip a beat. It was Michael. For a moment, I just stared at the phone, remembering his words about only calling about rent. But my maternal instincts were stronger than my hurt feelings, and I picked up on the 4th ring. "Hello, Michael." "Mom." His voice sounded different somehow. Strained. I need to talk to you about something." Here it comes, I thought. Some emergency that would require more money, more sacrifice, more of whatever I had left to give. "What is it, sweetheart?" "It's Sarah. She's in the hospital." My anger evaporated instantly, replaced by the familiar surge of maternal concern that no amount of rejection could completely extinguish. "Oh my God, Michael, what happened? Is she all right?" "She had an accident at work. Fell down some stairs and broke her leg pretty badly. She's going to need surgery, and she'll be off work for at least 6 weeks." I closed my eyes, already calculating how much this crisis would cost and how I could help, even though I barely had enough to cover my own expenses. "Do you need money for the medical bills?" I asked, the words coming automatically, despite everything that had happened between us. "No, Mom. Her insurance should cover most of it. That's not why I'm calling." I waited, confused about what he wanted, if not financial help. "The thing is, with Sarah laid up and unable to work, I'm going to have to take time off to take care of her. We already talked to her boss and she'll get some disability pay, but it won't be enough to cover everything." "What are you saying, Michael?" "I'm saying I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared about how we're going to manage. I'm scared about Sarah's recovery. I'm scared about money and work and everything." His voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort and reassurance from the mother who could make anything better. "Michael, honey, you know I'll help however I can. I know you will. That's not—" "Mom, I called because I realized something today. When the ambulance came, when they were loading Sarah into the back, the first person I wanted to call was you. Not my boss, not Sarah's parents, not anyone else. You." I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes, but I wasn't sure if they were tears of relief or sadness. And then I remembered what I said to you last week about not calling unless it was about rent, and I felt sick, actually sick to my stomach, because you're my mother, and I love you, and I was cruel to you for no good reason. The tears were flowing freely now, and I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing into the phone. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said. Sarah and I were stressed about money, and I took it out on you, and that was wrong. You call because you love me, and instead of being grateful to have a mother who cares, I made you feel bad about it." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, overwhelmed by this unexpected apology. It hurt, Michael. It hurt a lot. I know it did. And I hate that I hurt you. You're the best mother anyone could ask for, and you've been helping us with rent for 3 years without ever making us feel bad about it. You check on us because you love us, and I should have appreciated that instead of complaining about it. "I just worry about you," I whispered. "I know you do, and I want you to worry about me. I want you to call and check on me and ask how I'm doing and tell me to wear a coat when it's cold outside. I want my mother in my life, not just as someone who sends money, but as my mom." We both cried then, the kind of tears that wash away weeks of hurt and misunderstanding. When we finally composed ourselves, Michael asked if I would come to the hospital to visit Sarah. "She specifically asked me to call you," he said. "She feels terrible about everything that happened. She wants to apologize too." The next morning, I took 2 buses to reach the hospital in downtown Brooklyn, where Sarah was recovering from her surgery. I brought a small bouquet of flowers from the bodega near my apartment and a card I had picked out carefully, searching for something that expressed sympathy without resentment. I found Michael in the waiting area outside Sarah's room, looking exhausted and worried. When he saw me, he stood up and wrapped me in a hug that lasted longer than any embrace we had shared in years. "Thank you for coming, Mom." "Of course I came. She's family." When we walked into Sarah's room, I was shocked by how small and vulnerable she looked lying in the hospital bed, her leg elevated in a complicated cast and pulley system. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was pale with pain and medication. "Mrs. Matthews," she said when she saw me, her eyes immediately filling with tears. "I'm so glad you came. How are you feeling, dear?" I asked, settling into the chair next to her bed. "Physically, I'll be fine. The surgery went well, and the doctor says I should make a full recovery. But emotionally," she paused, struggling with her words, "I owe you an apology. A big one." I started to protest, but she held up her hand. "No, please let me say this. I know Michael talked to you about not calling so much, and I know that was partly my influence. I was stressed about work and money, and I took that out on you instead of dealing with my own problems." She reached for a tissue from the bedside table, wincing as the movement jarred her injured leg. "The truth is, I was jealous. Jealous of how close you and Michael are. Jealous of the fact that he turns to you when he's worried or scared. My own mother lives in California, and we're not very close. And instead of being grateful that Michael has such a loving mother, I resented it. Sarah, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Because lying here in this hospital bed, scared and in pain, I realized what an idiot I've been. When Michael called you yesterday, when you immediately offered to help without any anger or, "I told you so," I understood what kind of person you are, what kind of mother you are. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. I want to be the kind of daughter-in-law who appreciates having you in our lives, not one who sees you as an intrusion. I want to learn from you. I want my children, when we have them, to know their grandmother and love her the way Michael loves you. Over the next 2 hours, we talked more honestly than we ever had before. Sarah told me about her own complicated relationship with her mother, about feeling abandoned as a child and struggling to understand healthy family dynamics as an adult. I shared stories about raising Michael and Rebecca, about the fears and joys of motherhood, about the gradual process of learning to let your children live their own lives while still being available when they need you. When I finally left the hospital that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in months. The relationship with Michael wasn't completely healed. That would take time. But we had taken an important first step back toward each other. Over the following weeks, as Sarah recovered from her surgery, I found myself genuinely needed and appreciated in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Michael called me regularly with updates on Sarah's progress and questions about caregiving. Should he encourage her to walk more, or was rest more important? What foods would help her feel stronger? How could he manage his own stress while being her primary caregiver? I visited them several times, bringing home-cooked meals and sitting with Sarah while Michael ran errands or attended important work meetings he couldn't miss. We talked about everything and nothing: her childhood in Ohio, my early years of marriage, our shared love of old movies and mystery novels. But more importantly, I felt useful again, not just as a source of money, but as a source of wisdom and experience, as a mother and mother-in-law who had something valuable to offer beyond a monthly rent payment. One evening, about 3 weeks after Sarah's accident, Michael called me with unexpected news. "Mom, I got a promotion at work. A real promotion, with a significant salary increase. Honey, that's wonderful. Congratulations." "Thank you. But that's not the only reason I'm calling. The thing is, with this new salary, Sarah and I have been talking, and we want to start taking over our own rent payments again." I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in his success, relief at the financial pressure being lifted from my shoulders, and a tiny thread of worry that I was no longer needed. "Michael, that's such good news. I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of me too, but mostly I'm grateful. Grateful that you helped us for so long without ever making us feel bad about it. Grateful that you were patient with us while we figured out our finances and our priorities. You're my son. That's what mothers do. Not all mothers, Mom. Sarah and I have been talking to other couples our age, and we're starting to realize how lucky we are to have you. Most people's parents either can't help financially or hold it over their heads if they do. You never made us feel guilty or dependent. You just helped because you love us." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, processing this new development. For 3 years, sending that monthly rent payment had been both a burden and a connection to Michael's life. Now, with that obligation ending, I wondered what our relationship would look like going forward. I didn't have to wonder long. The next day, Michael called to invite me to dinner at their apartment. Not because they needed something from me, but because they wanted to celebrate his promotion and thank me for everything I had done. When I arrived at their place in Park Slope, I was amazed by how different the atmosphere felt. Sarah, still on crutches but moving around more confidently, greeted me with a warm hug and genuine smile. The apartment was filled with the scent of the Italian meal they had prepared together, and the table was set with candles and their good dishes. "This is beautiful," I told them, taking in the carefully prepared dinner and their obvious effort to make the evening special. "We wanted to do something nice for you," Sarah said, "to show you how much we appreciate everything you've done for us." During dinner, they told me about their plans for the future. Michael's promotion came with new responsibilities and opportunities for advancement. Sarah's leg was healing well, and she would be returning to work part-time in another week. They were talking about starting a family in the next year or two. "We want our children to know their grandmother," Sarah said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We want them to benefit from your wisdom and experience the way Michael did growing up. And we want you to feel free to call us whenever you want," Michael added. "In fact, we want you to call us more, not less. We want to be part of your life the way you've always been part of ours." As the evening progressed, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in our relationships. The crisis of Sarah's accident had forced all of us to examine what really mattered, and we had emerged with a clearer understanding of how to love and support each other. But the story doesn't end there, because life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 2 months later, just as I was settling into this new, healthier dynamic with Michael and Sarah, I received a phone call that changed everything once again. It was Rebecca, calling from Seattle at 6 o'clock in the morning, my time. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down." My stomach dropped. Early morning calls never brought good news. What is it, honey? It's Dad. His investments. Mom, there was some kind of fraud. The financial advisor he's been using for the past 10 years was running a Ponzi scheme. Dad lost everything. Everything. I was confused. Rebecca's father-in-law had always been financially savvy, a successful businessman who prided himself on smart investments and solid financial planning. I don't understand. How is that possible? Neither do we. Apparently, this advisor had fake credentials and was falsifying investment statements for years. Dad thought his retirement account was worth almost $2 million, but it turns out there's less than $50,000 left. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca's husband had lost his job 6 months earlier and was still looking for work. They had been living off their savings and his parents' financial support. If his parents had lost their retirement funds, Rebecca, what does this mean for your family? It means we're in trouble, Mom. Real trouble. Jim's still job hunting, and now his parents need financial help instead of being able to help us. The kids are in private school because the public schools here are so bad and our mortgage payment is killing us. I closed my eyes, already knowing where this conversation was heading. We've been talking, and Jim thinks maybe we should move back to New York. At least there. We'd be closer to family. And maybe Jim could find work more easily. That sounds like a good idea, sweetheart. The thing is, Mom, we'd need help with moving expenses and getting settled, and probably help with living expenses until Jim finds a job. There it was. The request I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. How much help are you talking about, Rebecca? I don't know. Maybe enough to cover a moving truck and first month's rent on a new place. And maybe help with monthly expenses for a few months, just until we get back on our feet. I did quick calculations in my head. With Michael no longer needing rent money, my budget had expanded somewhat, but not enough to support another household. The money I had been sending to Michael had come from my savings and Robert's life insurance payout. That well was nearly dry. Let me think about it, honey. This is a lot to process. I know it is. And Mom, I hate asking you for money. I know you helped Michael and Sarah for years, and I never wanted to be in the same position. Rebecca, you're my daughter. If I can help you, I will. But after I hung up the phone, I sat in my kitchen wondering if I was strong enough to start this cycle all over again with my other child. The financial sacrifice would be even greater this time, since Rebecca had a family of 4 instead of just a couple. And what would happen to the tentative new balance I had achieved with Michael if I started pouring money into Rebecca's problems? More troubling was the question of whether I was enabling my children's dependence on me instead of encouraging their independence. Was I helping them through temporary crises, or was I preventing them from learning to solve their own problems? That afternoon, I called my sister Margaret in Florida, the one person in my family who had always been willing to give me honest advice whether I wanted to hear it or not. Eleanor, you're going to bankrupt yourself trying to rescue these kids, she said bluntly after I explained the situation. But what choice do I have? They're my children. The choice is to let them be adults and figure out their own solutions. You think you're helping them, but you're not. You're teaching them that Mom will always bail them out, so they don't need to make hard decisions or sacrifices. But Rebecca's situation is different. Her father-in-law was a victim of fraud, and that's terrible, but it's not your responsibility to fix it. Rebecca and Jim are educated adults with skills and experience. They can figure out how to downsize their lifestyle, find less expensive housing, put their kids in public school. Millions of families manage to live within their means without financial help from elderly parents. Margaret's words stung because they contained more truth than I wanted to acknowledge. Over the years, had I made it too easy for my children to ask me for money instead of making difficult choices for themselves? What would you do? I asked her. I'd offer emotional support and practical advice, but I wouldn't write any checks, and I'd tell them exactly why. That evening, I called Rebecca back and asked her to conference Jim into the call so we could all discuss the situation together. I've been thinking about your request, I told them, and I want to help, but I think the kind of help you need might be different from what you're asking for. I took a deep breath before continuing. I can't afford to support another household financially the way I did for Michael. The truth is, I've been living on a very tight budget for years to help him with rent, and I'm already behind on some of my own expenses. Mom, we didn't know, Rebecca started, but I interrupted gently. Let me finish. I can't give you money, but I can offer you something else. You can move in with me temporarily while you get back on your feet. My apartment is small, but there's a living room where you and Jim could sleep, and the kids could share my bedroom while I sleep on the couch. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It wouldn't be comfortable, I continued, and it wouldn't be permanent, but it would give you time to find jobs and save money for your own place without the pressure of rent and moving expenses. Mom, we couldn't ask you to give up your bedroom, Rebecca protested. You're not asking. I'm offering. But there would have to be agreements about how long you could stay and what everyone's responsibilities would be. And you'd have to be willing to make some changes in your lifestyle. Over the next hour, we worked out the logistics. Jim would fly to New York first to job hunt while Rebecca and the kids finished the school year in Seattle. If he found work, they would join him in my apartment temporarily. If he couldn't find anything after 2 months, they would reassess their options. The arrangement wasn't ideal for anyone, but it was realistic given everyone's financial limitations. More importantly, it was help that came with clear boundaries and expectations instead of open-ended financial support. 3 weeks later, Jim arrived at my apartment with 2 suitcases and a determined expression. He was a good man, hardworking, devoted to his family, humiliated by their financial situation, but willing to do whatever it took to rebuild their security. Having another person in my small space took some adjustment, but Jim was respectful and helpful. He insisted on paying for groceries and cooking dinner most nights. He fixed a leaky faucet I had been ignoring and helped me reorganize my cluttered closets. Most importantly, he treated our arrangement as temporary assistance rather than a permanent solution. Within 6 weeks, Jim had found a job with a marketing firm in Manhattan. It didn't pay as much as his previous position, but it was enough to support his family modestly. He immediately started looking for affordable housing in Queens, somewhere they could manage on his salary alone. When Rebecca and the kids arrived in June, my small apartment became genuinely chaotic for the first time since Michael and Rebecca were teenagers. But it was a different kind of chaos than I had experienced as a young mother. This time, I was the grandmother watching my daughter navigate the challenges of parenting while dealing with her own stress and uncertainty. My grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old David, adapted to the cramped quarters with the resilience of youth. They turned my living room into an adventure playground and treated the whole situation like an extended sleepover with Grandma. Their laughter and energy filled my apartment with life in a way I hadn't experienced in years. But more importantly, I got to witness Rebecca's strength as she managed the family's transition with grace and determination. She enrolled the kids in the local public school, found a part-time job at a nearby library, and spent her evenings apartment hunting with Jim. Within 3 months, they had saved enough money for a security deposit on a small apartment in Astoria. The day they moved out was bittersweet. I was happy to have my space back and proud of how they had rebuilt their lives, but I also missed the daily chaos and connection of multi-generational living. Mom, I can't thank you enough, Rebecca told me as we packed the last of their boxes. Not just for letting us stay here, but for the way you helped us. You gave us what we needed instead of what we asked for. What do you mean? I mean, we asked for money, but what we really needed was time and space to figure out our own solutions. If you had just sent us checks every month, we might never have made the hard decisions that actually solved our problems. That evening, alone in my quiet apartment again, I reflected on the differences between my experiences with Michael and Rebecca. With Michael, I had provided financial support for years without addressing the underlying issues in our relationship. With Rebecca, I had offered practical help with clear boundaries, and the result was a stronger relationship and genuine problem-solving. But the most important lesson was yet to come. One Saturday morning in early fall, I was enjoying a cup of coffee and reading the newspaper when my phone rang. It was Michael, and he sounded upset. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and you're going to be angry." "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Sarah and I have been talking about something for weeks, and we finally made a decision. We want to pay you back for all the rent money you sent us over the years." "Michael, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. We calculated it out, and you sent us almost $60,000 over 3 years. Money you couldn't afford, money that came from your own savings and security." I was quiet, unsure how to respond. "We can't pay it all back at once, but we want to send you $500 every month until we've repaid everything. And not because we have to, but because we want to. Because it's the right thing to do. Honey, I gave you that money freely. I don't expect to be repaid." "I know you don't. But Sarah and I have been talking about what kind of people we want to be, what kind of example we want to set for our kids someday. And we don't want to be the kind of people who take advantage of their parents' generosity. You didn't take advantage of me. I offered to help. You offered because you love us. And we accepted because it was easier than making difficult choices. But now we're in a position to make better choices, and this is one of them." That afternoon, I found myself walking through McGulrick Park again, processing this unexpected development. In the span of a few months, my relationship with money and family support had been completely transformed. Instead of constantly giving money away, I was about to start receiving it. But more importantly, both of my children had learned to see our financial arrangements as temporary assistance rather than permanent entitlement. They had learned to value their independence and take responsibility for their own security. The first payment from Michael arrived 2 weeks later, along with a card that simply said, "Thank you for everything. Love, Michael and Sarah." I deposited the check and then did something I hadn't done in years. I spent money on myself without guilt. I bought a new winter coat to replace the one I had been wearing for 5 years. I got my hair professionally styled for the first time since Robert's funeral. I purchased fresh flowers for my apartment and good coffee for my morning ritual. Small luxuries, but they felt revolutionary after years of self-imposed austerity. The changes in my relationships with my children continued to evolve over the following months. Without the strain of financial dependence, our conversations became more balanced and natural. Michael and Sarah invited me to dinner regularly, not because they needed something from me, but because they enjoyed my company. Rebecca called me every Sunday to update me on their progress in their new apartment, and to let me talk to the grandchildren. She asked for my advice on parenting challenges and shared funny stories about their daily life. For the first time in years, I felt like a valued family member, rather than an ATM or a burden. But the most significant change was in my own sense of self-worth. I had spent so many years defining my value as a mother by how much I could give and sacrifice that I had forgotten I had worth beyond my usefulness to others. The turning point came during the holidays. Instead of hosting an elaborate dinner I couldn't afford while everyone else brought token contributions, I suggested we have a potluck-style celebration where everyone contributed equally. Michael and Sarah brought the main course, Rebecca's family handled side dishes, and I made dessert. The meal was delicious, but more importantly, everyone felt invested in making the celebration successful. No one person carried the entire burden, and no one felt like a charity case. As we sat around my small dining table, extended with a card table to accommodate everyone, I looked at the faces of my family and felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. These were people who loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. After dinner, as we were cleaning up together, Emma tugged on my sweater. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Are you happy we came to live with you?" Her innocent question caught me off guard. I knelt down to her eye level and took her small hands in mine. "Emma, having you and your family stay with me was one of the best experiences I've had in a long time. Not because I felt needed, but because I got to really know you and your brother and watch your parents work so hard to build a good life for your family. Mommy says you taught her to be strong. Your mommy was already strong. I just gave her a chance to show it." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the pleasant debris of a successful family gathering. Empty wine glasses, crumpled napkins, a few forgotten toys from the grandchildren. Instead of feeling lonely as I usually did when everyone left, I felt satisfied. This had been a celebration of genuine connection rather than obligation. No one had asked me for money or treated me like a necessary evil to be endured. I had finally learned the difference between being needed and being wanted, between being useful and being valued. Over the following year, my life continued to expand in ways I hadn't expected. With my finances stabilized by Michael's monthly payments and my relationships with my children healthier than they had been in years, I began to explore interests and activities I had set aside during my decades of single parenting and financial struggle. I enrolled in a pottery class at the Brooklyn Museum, something I had always wanted to try but never felt I could justify the expense. My first attempts were laughably lopsided, but I found the process of shaping clay with my hands surprisingly therapeutic. I also started volunteering at a literacy program for adult immigrants, using my decades of experience as a library employee to help people navigate the challenges of learning English and adapting to life in America. The work was meaningful in a way that had nothing to do with family obligations or financial support. Most surprisingly, I began to make new friends. Other women my age who were also redefining their lives after their children had grown and moved away. We formed an informal book club that met monthly at different members' homes, discussing everything from classic literature to contemporary mysteries. For the first time since Robert's death 15 years earlier, I had a social life that belonged entirely to me. The changes weren't lost on my children. During one of our regular Sunday phone calls, Rebecca commented on how different I sounded. "Mom, you seem so much more confident lately, more like yourself." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you sound like you have your own life again, instead of just waiting around for us to need you." Her observation was more perceptive than she probably realized. For years, I had been living in the spaces between other people's needs, defining myself entirely by my relationships with my children and grandchildren. Now I was rediscovering who I was as an individual person with my own interests, goals, and sources of satisfaction. The transformation became even more apparent during Rebecca's next visit to New York. She and the kids came to stay with me for a long weekend, and I noticed how differently she treated our time together. Instead of seeing me as someone who existed to serve her needs, She was genuinely interested in my pottery class, my volunteer work, and my new friendships. She asked thoughtful questions about my experiences and seemed proud of the ways I was expanding my horizons. "Mom, I want to be like you when I'm your age," she told me one evening as we sat on my couch after the kids had gone to bed. "Independent and engaged with life, not just waiting around for my children to visit." "You're already like that," I assured her. "You have your job, your friends, your own interests. But I worry sometimes that I'll lose all of that as I get older, that I'll become too dependent on Emma and David for my happiness." "The secret," I told her, "is to remember that being a mother is one of the most important things you'll ever do. But it's not the only thing. You're also Rebecca the librarian, Rebecca the wife, Rebecca the friend, Rebecca the individual person with her own dreams and goals." "When did you figure that out?" "About 6 months ago," I said with a laugh. "It only took me 73 years. The conversation reminded me of something I had read in one of my book club selections, about the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in the process. For years, I had thought that good mothers sacrificed everything for their children's success and happiness. I had equated love with self-erasure, but I was learning that the healthiest relationships, even between parents and children, required both people to maintain their sense of individual identity and worth. My children didn't need a mother who existed only to serve their needs. They needed a mother who modeled how to live a full, meaningful life at every stage. The lesson became even clearer during a conversation with Michael a few months later. He and Sarah had received some exciting news. They were expecting their first child. As he shared their joy and nervousness about becoming parents, I found myself offering advice that would have been impossible for me to give during my earlier years of insecure motherhood. "The best thing you can do for this baby," I told him, "is to be happy, fulfilled people yourselves. Children benefit more from parents who have their own sources of satisfaction than from parents who sacrifice everything and then resent the sacrifice." "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't make the mistakes I made. Don't give up everything that makes you who you are just because you become a parent. Stay connected to your friends, your interests, your individual goals. Your child will be better off with parents who model how to live a balanced, fulfilling life." Michael was quiet for a moment before responding. "Mom, is that what you did wrong when Rebecca and I were kids?" "I don't know if it was wrong, exactly, but I certainly lost myself in the process of raising you two. For years, I had no identity beyond being your mother, no interests beyond your needs, no sources of satisfaction beyond your achievements. But we turned out okay. You turned out wonderful, but that doesn't mean my approach was the healthiest for any of us. I created a dynamic where you felt guilty for needing less from me as you got older, and I felt lost and useless when you didn't need me. Is that why you were calling so much?" "Partly. I was trying to feel needed and connected, but I was going about it in a way that made you feel suffocated instead of loved." "I get it now. And Mom, for what it's worth, I think you figured it out. You seem happier and more confident than you've been in years." His words meant more to me than any Mother's Day card or birthday gift ever could. The validation of my transformation came in an unexpected form several months later. I was at the grocery store, carefully comparing prices on different brands of pasta, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Eleanor? Eleanor Matthews?" I turned to see Janet Morrison, a woman I had worked with at the library years earlier. We had been friendly colleagues, but had lost touch after I retired. "Janet, how wonderful to see you. Oh my goodness, you look amazing. So vibrant and energetic. What have you been doing with yourself?" As I told her about my pottery classes, volunteer work, and book club, I realized that she was right. I did feel more vibrant and energetic than I had in years. The constant stress of financial worry and dysfunctional family relationships had been replaced by the satisfaction of personal growth and genuine connections. "You know," Janet said, "I'm part of a group that organizes cultural events for seniors in Brooklyn. We're always looking for people who might be interested in helping plan museum visits, theater outings, that kind of thing. Would you be interested?" 6 months earlier, I would have declined automatically, assuming I couldn't afford the time or money for such activities. Now, I found myself saying yes without hesitation. "That sounds wonderful. I'd love to get involved." Within a few weeks, I was helping organize a group visit to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, something I had always wanted to see but had never made time for during my years of single-focused child-rearing and financial sacrifice. As I walked through the gardens with a group of other women my age, marveling at the late spring blooms and enjoying the easy camaraderie of shared discovery, I had a moment of profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had led me to this place. If Michael had never told me to stop calling unless it was about rent, I might never have been forced to examine the unhealthy patterns in our relationship. If I had never experienced the pain of feeling reduced to a monthly check, I might never have learned to value myself beyond my usefulness to others. The crisis that had felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of my transformation from a financially and emotionally depleted mother to a confident, independent woman who happened to also be someone's mom. The final confirmation of this transformation came during Michael and Sarah's baby shower, which I helped organize and host. As I watched my son and daughter-in-law opening gifts surrounded by friends and family, I felt a pure joy that had nothing to do with being needed and everything to do with being part of their celebration. When Sarah opened the gift I had chosen, a beautiful handmade baby blanket I had purchased from one of the artists at my pottery studio, she immediately started crying. "Mrs. Matthews, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I thought you might like it. And please call me Eleanor. We're family." Later, as we were cleaning up after the party, Michael pulled me aside. "Mom, I have something to tell you." "What is it, sweetheart?" "Sarah and I have been talking, and we want to ask you something. We know this baby is going to change everything for us, and we're going to need help sometimes. Not financial help," he added quickly, "but practical help. Someone to watch the baby occasionally, someone to offer advice when we're overwhelmed. I'd be happy to help however I can. The thing is, we want to make sure we do this right. We want to ask for your help when we need it, but we also want to respect your independence and your own life. We don't want to repeat the old patterns where you sacrifice everything for us." I felt tears forming in my eyes at his thoughtfulness. "Michael, the fact that you're even thinking about this tells me we've all learned something important over the past year." "What's that?" "We've learned that the best relationships are the ones where everyone gives and receives, where everyone maintains their own sense of self while still being connected to the people they love." 3 months later, when baby James was born, I got to witness this new dynamic in action. Michael and Sarah asked for my help with specific tasks: watching the baby while Sarah went to doctor appointments, bringing dinner when they were too exhausted to cook. But they also encouraged me to maintain my own schedule and commitments. When I had to miss one of my volunteer shifts at the literacy program because the baby was sick and they needed extra help, Sarah insisted on rescheduling so I wouldn't have to give up something that was important to me. "Eleanor, we appreciate your help, but we don't want you to sacrifice your own activities for us. This baby is our responsibility, and we need to figure out how to manage without disrupting your life." It was a small gesture, but it represented a complete reversal of the old dynamic where my needs and interests were automatically subordinated to family emergencies. As I held my grandson for the first time, looking into his tiny face and marveling at the perfect miniature features, I felt a love that was both familiar and completely different from anything I had experienced before. This was a love without conditions, without expectations, without the complicated dynamics of obligation and resentment that had characterized my relationships with my own children during their years of dependence. This was simply pure affection for a new person who would benefit from having a grandmother who was whole and happy in her own right, someone who could offer wisdom and support without needing anything in return except the joy of being part of his life. 6 months later, as I write this story, I'm sitting in my apartment on a quiet Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through my windows and fresh flowers brightening my kitchen table. In a few hours, Michael and Sarah will arrive with baby James for our weekly Sunday dinner, and Rebecca will call from Seattle to catch up on everyone's news. But for now, I'm content to be alone with my thoughts and my memories, reflecting on the journey that brought me from desperation to contentment, from exploitation to respect, from invisibility to genuine love. I'm 74 years old now, and I've finally learned what my mother never taught me, and what I hope to model for my children: that being alone doesn't have to mean being lonely, that being needed isn't the same as being valued, and that the best kind of love is the kind that enhances both people instead of diminishing one for the benefit of the other. The phone on my kitchen counter sits silently, no longer the source of anxiety and desperate hope it once was. When it rings, I answer with genuine pleasure rather than desperate gratitude. When it doesn't ring, I continue with my own activities and interests, secure in the knowledge that the people who love me will be in touch when they have something meaningful to share. This morning, I have plans to visit the Brooklyn Museum's new exhibition with my book club friends, followed by lunch at a cafe we've been wanting to try. This evening, I'll work on a new pottery project I'm excited about, a set of bowls I'm making as Christmas gifts for my family. Tomorrow, I'll return to my volunteer work at the literacy program, where I'll help Maria practice reading English stories to her young daughter and assist Carlos with his citizenship test preparations. Their gratitude is genuine but uncomplicated, based on the value I provide rather than blood relationships or financial obligations. The woman who used to lie awake at night wondering if her children would ever call, who rationed her own food to send rent money to a son who treated her like an ATM, who measured her worth entirely by her usefulness to others, that woman feels like a stranger to me now. In her place is someone I'm still getting to know, but someone I like very much. A woman who has learned to set boundaries without building walls, who can offer help without losing herself in the process, who can love her family deeply while maintaining her own sense of identity and purpose. The transformation wasn't easy or quick. It required facing some painful truths about the dynamics I had enabled and the ways I had contributed to my own exploitation. It required learning to say no to requests I couldn't reasonably fulfill, and yes to opportunities that enriched my own life. Most importantly, it required recognizing that being a good mother doesn't mean being a sacrificial mother, and that the best gift I can give my children is the example of a woman who values herself appropriately and lives a full, meaningful life at every stage. If you're listening to this story and recognizing yourself in my experiences, I want you to know that change is possible at any age. You don't have to accept being treated as invisible or unimportant by the people you love. You don't have to bankrupt yourself emotionally or financially to prove your worth as a parent or family member. You have value beyond what you can provide to others. You have the right to be treated with respect and consideration. You have the right to your own interests, your own friends, your own sources of satisfaction and joy. It's never too late to reclaim your sense of self, to establish healthier boundaries, to transform relationships based on obligation into relationships based on genuine mutual respect and affection. The journey may be difficult, and there may be people who resist your efforts to change dysfunctional dynamics. But on the other side of that difficulty is a kind of freedom and contentment that makes every challenging moment worthwhile. As I prepare for another Sunday dinner with my family, I'm grateful for the crisis that forced me to examine my life and relationships so closely. Without Michael's cruel words about only calling about rent, I might have continued accepting scraps of attention and affection for years, never realizing that I deserved so much more. Now, when my family gathers around my table, it's because they want to be here, not because they need something from me. When my phone rings, it's because someone has something to share, not because they need to ask for money or favors. The conversations are richer, the connections are deeper, and the love is more genuine because it flows from choice rather than obligation. I still help my children when they need it, but now that help comes from a place of strength rather than desperation, from abundance rather than depletion. I can offer support without losing myself in the process because I maintain my own sources of fulfillment and my own sense of worth. Baby James will grow up with a grandmother who models independence and self-respect, who shows him that love enhances life rather than consuming it. Emma and David will have memories of a grandmother who had her own interests and activities, who treated herself with the same care and consideration she showed others. And my children will have the example of a mother who learned to age gracefully and purposefully, who discovered that the later chapters of life can be just as rich and meaningful as the earlier ones. This is my message to anyone who has ever felt invisible, taken for granted, or reduced to what they can provide to others. Your story doesn't have to end with that chapter. You can write new chapters at any age, and they can be the most authentic and satisfying chapters of all. Have you ever experienced something similar in your own family relationships? Have you found yourself questioning whether you're valued for who you are or only for what you can do for others? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes just sharing our experiences helps us process them and find the courage to make necessary changes. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Sharing these stories helps us all feel less alone in our struggles and reminds us that transformation is possible at any stage of life. Thank you for listening to my journey from desperation to liberation. May it inspire you to examine your own relationships and claim the respect and love you deserve.